Good afternoon. My name is Luann Gruber, and I'm here today to talk to you about the importance of maintaining emotional control during competition. I am presently enrolled in the Performance Psychology Master's Program at National University. Competitive anxiety is experienced by individuals of all ages and skill levels and is associated with any type of performance, from athletics to the boardroom to the operating table. Next slide, please. During my presentation today, we will discuss and identify some of the common sources of competitive anxiety among athletes. We will examine the relationship between anxiety and self-confidence among athletes and discuss some strategies which may be used in response to anxiety in sport. First, let's talk about performance anxiety, or stage fright, as it's commonly called. It is very common and occurs in approximately 80% of performers. The entire act of performing involves presenting yourself with the intention of demonstrating some type of skill in front of an audience. Physiological responses include shaking, either the body or the voice, sweating, rapid heartbeat, upset stomach, dizziness, dry mouth, and even blushing. Cognitive responses may include narrowing of attention, shifts in concentration, and negative thoughts. The attention that a person pays to this arousal is what determines whether the experience is helpful to the performance or speeds up the unraveling and the decline of the performance. Next slide, please. Common sources of anxiety. In a 2014 study, both the internal and external sources of anxiety were discussed. External categories include spectators, time, competition level, setting, and consequences. As far as the spectators go, we're talking about the size of the audience and who is in it, parents, boyfriend, girlfriend, college scout, professional scout, or even future opponents. Time is considered in the context of time spent waiting to perform and the duration of the performance. Depending upon the sport, if there is a delay in the game or a timeout called prior to a free throw, a field goal, or a serve, this may cause increased stress on the performer. After all, that's why our opponents use these tactics, right? The competitive level is the individual's level, the team's level, and also the perceived level of skill of the opponent. If we perceive our opponents as highly skilled, this often increases our stress level and anxiety when competing against them. The setting is the location, for example, home, away, or neutral. The home crowd could be larger and more supportive, the away crowd hostile. The consequences are the outcome of performing well or performing poorly. If we lose, are we out? Will we make it to the championship round? Qualify for the next level? Internal categories include investment, uncertainty, self-confidence, and the fear of letting self or others down. Investment refers to how meaningful the performance is to the athlete and how dedicated they are to the activity. If it is extremely important to the athlete to do well, and they have sacrificed numerous hours of practice, the anxiety level they experience will be considerably more than that of someone who has not invested a lot of time in preparing. Uncertainty is described as the outcomes of performance being unknown, which often causes the performer to wonder what if potential events occurred and to overthink the performance. Even if their performance is the best that it can possibly be, is that going to be good enough to get them on the podium? Self-confidence describes how secure the athlete is in performing the skills required to be successful in competition. Lastly, the fear of letting self or others down describes the concern of letting yourself, your coaches, teammates, parents, or fans down by not performing well. Self-confidence impacts whether the anxiety one experiences has a helpful or a harmful impact on an individual's performance. Self-confidence appears to moderate the effect that anxiety has on performance. The same activity may produce extreme stress in some individuals and enjoyment in others. Self-confidence levels mediate whether stress or enjoyment is felt. Anxiety and self-confidence have been shown to be related. When an athlete notices one, they may notice the other. For example, an increase in anxiety may cause an individual to notice a decrease in self-confidence. Results of a recent study showed that athletes who experience a low level of competitive anxiety on practice days typically experience low levels of both mental and physical anxiety and high levels of self-confidence on competition days. It was also shown that high levels of self-confidence on practice days led to high self-confidence and low mental and physical anxiety on competition days. By understanding an athlete's levels of self-confidence and anxiety prior to competing, coaches and professionals may be able to better predict how the athlete will perform. This will also allow them to consider different strategies to decrease or simply control negative reactions to anxiety. Next slide, please. Strategies. Simulation training. This is being involved in training sessions that simulated competition through a combination of two mediums: mental rehearsal and physical practice. By performing imagery and training in the presence of stressors associated primarily and directly with competition, for example, poor officiating, competitive rivals, crowd noise, adverse weather conditions, this brings about thoughts and feelings associated with their usual anxiety response. Athletes then imagine themselves coping successfully and striving in these conditions. In the military, this is done by performing drills of casualty or emergency drills and individuals responding to the scenario. The drills are implemented in as realistic an environment as possible, often with the use of smoke machines to simulate fire and water to simulate flooding. Okay, cognitive restructuring. This is turning negative thoughts into positive thoughts. This strategy is used primarily in pre-competitive periods, at various times before competition, and in a number of different settings. For example, in the locker room, during warm-up, if you're traveling, possibly on the bus or the flight prior to getting there. A lot of times turning negative thoughts into positive ones will lead the individual to perceive their self-confidence as being higher. Pre-performance routines. Athletes develop their pre-performance routines with their teammates, their coaches, or individually by themselves, and they typically begin when they arrive at the competition site. Specifics may vary between athletes, but normally include a warm-up period, preparing the equipment if that's a requirement. Then a conscious decision is made to use mental strategies to psychologically prepare for competition. Once the athlete has taken control and completed their routine, they often feel confident and positive. Another example of a routine or is a routine which the athlete performs prior to a specific skill. For example, if you closely observe an elite athlete performing a free throw, their physical movements each time the skill is performed is usually identical. The same thing with a volleyball player serving or a football player setting up and kicking the extra point. Typically, their their body movements are going to be identical each time they do that skill. Overlearning skills. Repeatedly practicing the relevant core skills, such as kicking, passing, shooting, in a structured way during training is overlearning skills. This is often done by physical repetitions and mental rehearsals. By repeatedly being successful, the level of stress will decrease. Learning strategies to assist with anxiety will ultimately lead to higher levels of self-confidence, and that's what we want. The last strategy that we're going to talk about is PETLEP imagery. Next slide, please. This model of imagery is made up of 7 components: physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. The physical refers to the importance of making the imagery as physical as possible. Athletic skills are physical in nature, and the imagery should also be. This approach includes imagining the physical sensations felt when performing, wearing the uniform, and holding any associated equipment. For example, a competitive swimmer would be wearing their swimming suit in or at least beside the pool and wearing their goggles. This is considered the most crucial element of the PETLEP model. The importance of this element is strongly supported by research. Environment is simply the place where the imagery is performed. This should be as similar as possible to the performance environment. It would be ideal if the imagery could be performed in the competitive arena. For our example, it would be the swimming pool. But that might not be practical. If it's not possible to perform the imagery in that environment, then you could also use video, audio, photographs. Those tools could be used to enhance the imagery experience. Task emphasizes that the content or the script of the imagery should be appropriate to the skill level and individual preferences of the athlete, particularly with regard to attentional focus. Individual athletes focus their attention on different aspects of a performance. An elite athlete may focus on more advanced and intricate skills and details, meaning just that the intervention should be tailored to the individual needs of the athlete. Timing is the pace at which the imagery is completed. The idea is that it should be performed in real time, whenever possible. In our example of a swimmer, if the race was 100 meters, then the timing for the script should be the goal time that the athlete is training for, as long as their skill level supports that. Learning considers the skill level of the performer, emphasizing that the content of the imagery script should be changed as the individual becomes more skilled. If you're not a professional athlete, your script will not be written as if you are one, simply meaning that if you are only capable of driving a golf ball off the tee 150 yards, your script will reflect that. Emotion relates to the fact that competitive sport is an emotion-laden experience. For imagery to be realistic, the emotions felt during performance should be mentally recreated during the imagery practice. Research supports the PETLEP intervention to be more effective, meaning a greater improvement in performance was shown than imagery that was conducted with instructions to relax prior to completing the imagery. Not many skills are performed in a state of complete relaxation. So by including realistic emotions in the imagery, it makes it more powerful and may lead to a more vivid experience. Perspective is the viewpoint of the performer during imagery. This can be internal, through the eyes of the performer, or external, seeing yourself performing as if you were watching yourself on TV. For this element, it is recommended to follow personal preferences of the athlete to determine which perspective to use, or a switching of perspectives could also be used. PetLab imagery may be an alternative to physical practice in situations where further practice is not possible or advisable, such as through fatigue or boredom. It could also be a very valuable tool for use with athletes who are recovering from an injury. A combination of physical practice and imagery is likely to be the most effective. Of course, there are different uses of imagery depending on the outcome that the coach or the athlete is aiming to achieve, such as increasing confidence, improving the performance of a specific skill, or increasing motivation. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? All right. We discussed some of the common sources of competitive anxiety among athletes, examined the relationship between anxiety and self-confidence among athletes, and talked about some different strategies which may be used in response to anxiety in sport. Thank you very much.